Thank you. And I suppose I would add to Sue's introduction, which was very kind, that in terms of midwifery clinical practice, my happy place was community midwifery, which I did for many years before going into the other things that were mentioned. But what I'd like to take you through today is, as Sue said, talking through our standards and the relationship with midwives' safety and promoting positive outcomes and experiences. And it does link in with some of the talks that we've heard earlier today. Many of you in the room will be very familiar with our standards for today's midwives, and that it's quite startling to think that they were now published almost five years ago. And I think that I've talked about the standards from front to back and from back to front and diagonally, both ways. So, and picking up on various elements of what's in the standards. And what's one of the key things is that the standards in this document are not just for students, they're for midwives, and that's reflected in the underpinning, which is that they're for and reflect what the public can expect midwives to know and be able to do in order to deliver safe, effective, respectful, kind, compassionate, person-centred midwifery care. And many of you will know them in their previous cover, but the covers have just changed. So if you go online, you'll find them now in lilac or purple or mauve, depending on what way you interpret the colours. But they're part of something which was a 6-year piece of work where we collectively looked at all the standards and moved them up to date in the period between 2018 up to slightly more recently with about 2002. But we worked through the standards for education and training, then the standards of proficiency and the programme standards for pre-reg and some of the post-reg courses for which we hold responsibility, but all, as you can see, centred around the code and person-centred. When we were developing the midwifery standards, we took into account the best global and local evidence that we could and that was available at the time. So we took into account the maternity strategies from the 4 countries of the UK. We took into account the World's Midwifery Report at the time, which was not that one, but the one before. And we also looked at things like the NICE guidance, Embrace, underpinned by the code, and also things like the Cochrane Library, the evidence there. But one of the most crucial things, and which is actually in the standards of proficiency, was that the underpinning, apart from the code, was with the NMC Council's agreement, the Framework for Quality Maternal and Newborn Health from the Lancet series. And this is a seminal piece of work which identifies the thing that then followed through into the standards, which is the idea of universal care, which is what all women and their babies and infants need, and then the care that some women need because they have complications and or the babies have complications or additional needs that arise during pregnancy. And also within this framework, you're looking at practice categories, organisation of care, values, philosophy, and care providers. And that piece of work still stands and is absolutely, as I said, running through the standards of proficiency. What we ended up with, and it's worth saying that it wasn't just that we sat in a room at the NMC and came up with the standards. As you would expect, the work was led by a well-known midwife who is now an emerita professor of the University of Dundee, and that's Professor Mary Renfrew, who led this work, and we had a 2.5-year run-up to the actual presentation of the standards in draft to Council, and then their agreement to go ahead. And along the way, there had been a thought leadership group which drew on the discussions and so on, from midwives from around the UK. It also included students, and of course, given the length of it, we had students who started off with us who'd qualified and were on the register by the time we finished the work. But they were all inputting to the work, including people from other professions linked to maternity services. So we had sort of social scientists and so on also contributing and helping us to develop the work in the way that we wanted. And what we were aiming for is, what do we actually need for the future midwife? There's no point writing a set of proficiencies for midwives from the previous century. We needed to be writing proficiencies that were appropriate for what's needed from midwives by women for the 21st century, by women and their families. So what we ended up with is the 6 standards of proficiency, and they're all interrelated and they're all important. And the one that we're sort of picking on today is Domain 2, which is around safe and effective midwifery care. And we linked it very clearly because of the evidence base around it, around providing continuity of care and carer, because the evidence has been around since Pussy was a kitten, as I would say in Northern Ireland. And it does mean that we were linking it very clearly in this with safe and effective midwifery care. So, as you can see, all those sort of elements of the skills that are needed are all together in Domain 6. So, what we were aiming for, as I've said, is the role and scope of the midwife in this century. And the key thing is that midwives are combining the clinical knowledge, the understanding and skills with interpersonal skills and cultural competence. And even the language of those standards has moved on, because now what we're hearing is people talking about the importance of retaining cultural curiosity, because you're never going to know everybody's cultural background just sort of like that. You have to retain the ability to ask the questions, be interested, learn and understand. And also going back to some of the discussions, as I said this morning, about the importance in the context of cultural competence and curiosity of interpreting. Because it's one thing having English, it's quite another thing having medical English or midwifery English. It's a completely different ballgame in many, and it's sometimes, all of us know it can be hard enough to explain it in your own language and have it understood, let alone in a second, third, or in some cases, 6th language. I was struck when I was at the most recent ICM conference that we had somebody on the stage who apologised for her English. And then I felt, goodness me, she was apologising for English when it was her 6th language. And I felt like saying, I can't just about manage English, let alone, 6. So it's always remembering that context and the importance of, having the ability to communicate and communicate effectively with people. And this also picks up on the importance of midwifery in the overarching and developing importance of public health and understanding social and health inequalities and how to mitigate for them. That's the important bit. How can you mitigate against all of this by good midwifery care? And that's what we were trying to get across in the standards of proficiency. So, within the standards of proficiency, we did have a series of key themes. And I've used various sort of analogies and so on over the years, but the one I'm quite fond of is thinking of Colin Firth in a sort of Christmas jumper. You want to think of these things as being the sort of the pattern in the jumper. They go the whole way through the jumper, but they're very important and they give you an overall picture. And some of the key themes, of which there are 17, are here. I'll not read all of them, but what was important was the really key point of always using evidence-based care and the importance of staying up to date with current knowledge. And that's obvious from all of you in the room that that's what you're here doing today, keeping up to date with current knowledge and knowing what's going on in the world of evidence-based care. And then the point about safety is coming in, and it's safety in its broadest sense. It's not just physical safety, it's that physical safety, but also psychological, social, cultural, spiritual safety, and it's for women and their newborn infants and, of course, the family as well. And the very, very key point about communication and relationship building. And this was felt to be so important, and as I said, was knitted through the entire document, that if you go to domain 6, you'll notice that all the communication points have been pulled together in one sort of section of the skills part. And we also pulled together all the sort of information around medicines and so on, because those are sort of two key things that can be sort of problematic and are very important. And the communication is absolutely key to the relationship building and working in partnership with women. And all of this links in with making sure that the information that we're giving and the information that's needed to fully inform decisions and give consent is also evidence-based and up to date. And again, around the importance of the continuity of care and carer, and about optimising normal processes of reproduction in early life, anticipating any additional care needs and knowing how to deal with them, and then also about multi-agency and interdisciplinary working, because we're not an island. We all work and communicate with other people in other parts of the maternity service and the bigger maternity sort of voluntary sector and everything else. So, picking up on the safety and the standards, there's various points that it crops up specifically, and I'll just take you through a couple of them. But in domain 2, as we said in that circular diagram, is the key place linking it safety and continuity of care and carer. And here we're talking about the safety and effectiveness and the positive and negative aspects of different ways of organising care. And that's where this sort of idea around continuity comes in, because how the care is organised can have a real impact on the care of women, and also how safe midwives feel in the organisation and the way that they're working. And in domain 5, which is the domain that picks up on the leadership aspects and the midwife as a colleague and a leader and a scholar, we're talking about the really important contribution, crucial importance of midwives' contribution to the quality and safety of maternity care, because we're it really, we're there, we're by the women, we're with the women, and it's about avoiding harm, and this is the promotion of positive outcomes and experiences. It's not about promoting a certain type of birth, because the outcome, as we all know, it can go all over the place in the course of the labour, and people can end up with not quite the birth that they were anticipating. But it's about making sure that it's a positive outcome and that the experience has been as positive as it can be for the birth that they've experienced. And there's also about, again, quality and safety and learning about positive and adverse outcomes and experience and the sharing of feedback. And those of you who've come round already to the stand will see that we have some sort of mini campaigns that we've done around communication and around listening to women, and we've got vignettes and feedback in a webinar format from women about, in many cases, the little things that midwives did that made them feel that they'd been listened to. And the classic was around language, where a woman who was having her first baby and was anticipating that it would be fairly straightforward. She had a very straightforward pregnancy, all that sort of stuff. But she had specifics in her birth plan about the language that she wished to be used. She didn't want the use of sort of negative language, and she wanted the use of positive language throughout her labour and birth. And as the labour progressed and so on, while it didn't go quite the way she was anticipating, she knew that the midwife had listened to her, had heard her, and had understood, because she was getting that language reflected back to her the whole way through her labour, and in that positive, sort of empowering sense of knowing, as I said, that she'd been listened to. So that thing about learning is very important. And again, further into domain 5, there's this understanding the relationship between safe staffing levels, appropriate skill mix, and the safety and quality. And this comes in, again, to that broader definition of safety. It's not just about physical safety of the women, it's about safety in the biggest sense. And then, again, any needs for safeguarding, recognising the individuality and diversity of individual circumstances, but also thinking about the environment and what you can do on a sort of one-to-one individual basis about maximising things like the safety, the privacy, the dignity, the well-being, and optimising those normal physiological processes and providing a welcoming environment. because there's nothing worse than I've dandered on and off delivery suites and labour wards or whatever, MLUs, in and out in various roles that I've had. And I would always say that what makes me feel positive or not so positive about it is the welcome that I get when I wander in. And if I wander in and everybody's sitting on the midwife station and they're eating sandwiches and they're not looking at who's coming in, and you're ignored for about 10 minutes while you sort of twiddle your thumbs in the background, that's not a welcoming environment. So it's about thinking through those things that make the environment welcoming. And I think we've got much better at that very recently because of the recognition that the emotional safety and the psychological safety is very important for midwives, and also that sort of supportive environment of knowing that people were thinking about you. So they're making sure that you're having breaks. They're making sure that there are sort of supportive environments, but also things like decent food that you can get at certain times of the shifts and so on, and making sure that you have a rest space where you can sort of take yourself off and out of the environment. And I know that breaks can be an issue, but it's about thinking through the sort of supportive environment for your midwives and for your other staff, as well as making sure that it's a welcoming environment for women. So, some of the things that we've done have been thinking about the best midwifery care, and it happens in partnership with the women. So we've done a series of little vignettes and some work around thinking about leadership. And while it applies to both nursing and midwifery, within this we have 2 vignettes from midwives, one of whom is Shona Hamilton, who's a consultant midwife in Northern Ireland, and she's talking about the need for leaders helping their teams to advocate for the women in their care. And what she said is that it's very important to give positive feedback to both midwives and students at the end of the day through this shift, and feedback that positive sort of affirming, you're doing a good job, the care that you're giving is really good. And Shona's been working in Northern Ireland and has a particular interest in perinatal mental health. And then the other midwife that we've got is Wendy, who's the National Maternity Lead at NHS England and Improvement. And she's making that point about the environment. Show me the environment and I will tell you the kind of leadership in this place. And that's picking up on the sort of vibe that you get when you go in, and the leadership being very important. And while we are now talking, and it reflected in Domain 5, about leadership from the get-go, leading as a student, leading in your environment, wherever you're working and whatever banding you are, leadership's irrelevant in the sense of banding. It's through your career, thinking about how you lead and the role modelling that you're doing as you work your way through what's quite, for many of us, quite a long midwifery career. And it's being that example of the care you would like to receive and the care that you want to give. And one of the things that Shona says in the webinar that we've done is that her advice to anybody would be, find the person whose leadership style you admire. You admire the care that they give, and work with them as much as you can, so that you're learning, as it were, in practice. Because there's always somebody whose leadership you really admire and you think, that's great. I wish when I grow up and I'm a proper midwife, that's what I'm going to do. And I do. I can still remember my person that I followed around. Probably nowadays she'd probably think I was stalking her. But it was a community midwife called Leslie, and I just loved the way she practiced. I loved the way she communicated with women, and I loved the way she knew stuff. You know, there was nothing that Leslie, as far as I was concerned, didn't know, and she really did have the evidence in her back pocket at all times. So what we've done is we've thought through good leadership, meaning better care, and thinking through that, you know, in every team, the success of the team is very dependent on the leader, and that's about thinking where we can go with this. So we've got several resources around this, and the importance of good leadership, and supporting teams in pressurised environments, and inclusive working arrangements for people from diverse backgrounds. And that can be thinking about, the quiet space and having the ability to step back and thinking about, as again, the cultural curiosity. And are there, for example, faith requirements or other requirements around diet or whatever that are important for the people that you're working with and for? So we've, you'll probably gather as this, go through the remains of this sort of presentation, that I've got the hang of doing QR codes. So for anybody that's looking at this afterwards, feel free to use my QR codes. I have double-checked them and they do work, which is good. So we've got some NMC resources that have been done. And as I said, the code underpins everything that we do. And we always are talking about the code and abiding with the code. But what we've done is we've done a series of sort of little bite-sized animations, which can be very useful, particularly if you're working with students or you are a student, in thinking about the elements of the code. So we've got things like being inclusive, challenging discrimination, social media, professionalism, accountability, and so on. So those, again, are all available for those of you who'd like to follow up. They're on our website and downloadable. We've also got supporting information for student supervision and assessment, and videos and so on to go along with that. So, as you know, during COVID, we put a pause on implementing SSSA, and we've now moved into the space of making sure that that's the way everybody's sort of supervised and assessed. The resources for students are there, and I'm sorry it's gone a bit funny. What it should say there is the code, our role in education, social media guidance. There's a student newsletter. There's a whole series of newsletters, and you can sign up for whichever one sort of grabs your fancy, really. We've got one for nursing, we've got one for employers, we've got one for students, we've got one for midwives, and so on. So do feel free to sign up for those if you'd like to receive them by email. We've also got something for students on duty of candour and raising concerns as a student. The particular resources for students that we came up with more recently are little video clips from the NMC with sort of talking heads, because when we've been out and about at conferences like this, what we've been slightly discombobulated, I suppose, to hear is that students are worried about losing their PIN before they've even got it, which I feel is the wrong way round, really. And while fitness to practice looms large, it's only part of the work of the NMC, and the numbers that get anywhere near that side of the house are very, very small. But I think that it's good to hear about the NMC from the NMC. So these are little video clips that have been done talking to students and can be used in sort of first year, second year, third year. So for example, second year, getting the best out of your education. Third year, it's about finishing your programme. First year, it's about your journey and your role, and that introduces new students to the NMC's role in a non-scary, pin-removing way. So hopefully that'll be a positive step forward in the information for students. There's a couple of things that we're moving into. So what we're going to be looking at over the next year or so, we're looking at advanced practice, which is developing an approach to the additional regulation of advanced practice. And some of you in the room will probably have been involved in the preliminary work that we've been doing in sort of phase one, where we've been working with focus groups essentially, and also with the 4 countries and so on, to gather the information that we've already got about advanced practice. And it's worth saying that advanced practice isn't as much of a thing in midwifery as it is in nursing, but we're definitely in the room on this because there are advanced midwife practitioners out there. And I did get a reminder when I was preparing for this talk that I've actually got a master's in advanced midwifery practice, which was something that I needed to be reminded about because it was one of the first master's courses, and it wasn't, I think, in the space where there were a lot of advanced midwifery practitioners, but the evidence is out there that they are people in roles that are commensurate with sort of advanced practice, but there are also considerations that we have to take into account around the differences between midwifery and nursing and the autonomy from the get-go that comes in with midwifery. So there's work to be done on this, and there's also the consideration about how we would move people from where they are into a sort of registration space around advanced practice. So exciting times, and we will be doing further engagement to pick up and run with the agreement from Council to move into the next phase. So it's not a done deal, but we're in the space with this. And there are very few places in the world that regulate midwifery advanced practice, and as far as we can make out, there's really one that's close by, which is Ireland, as in the sense of the Republic. So we're looking at their work that they've already done on advanced practice and its regulation and the standards and so on that they've set. And we'll have to think about it in the context of we have jobs and roles that the Republic of Ireland doesn't have, like consultant midwives. We have differences around specialist midwives or midwives with special interests and so on. So it's about how that all mixes in to the world of advanced practice. So for those of you who'd like to, there's a community of interest on advanced practice, and you can find more with our latest webinar and so on. So there's work ongoing on that, and as I say, that'll be over the next sort of year and a half. We're also doing something which is in its early stages, which is a review of nursing and midwifery practice learning, because the programs are 50-50, and the learning that's done in practice is really, really important. So what we're doing is looking at the practice, and it'll also impinge on looking at how the supervision and the assessment and so on is done, and what the practice environment's like for students, because we're well aware that there can be fluctuations with how many students you've got and how effective the supervision can be in those circumstances. Excuse me. And thinking through all the elements that go into the student having a good experience in practice, because the learning that they do there is really, really important. And as I say, 50% of their programme. So, again, we have newsletters, and that's just a reminder about them, but also do sign up to our community of interest if that's something that you're interested in. So, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'm going to get a glass of water now, because I think that might be partly because I went to a Bruce Springsteen concert last week, and I was singing along, well, not singing, yelling along to the songs, so I've sort of had a bit of problem with my speaking ever since. So, as they say, no fool like an old fool. So, but it's worth it to see the boss in action. So, thank you very much for your time and interest.